The Art and Life of Hilma af Klint by Ylva Hillstrom and Karen Eklund. In late October 1862, when the sun was in the sign of Scorpio, a little girl was born in Karlberg Palace in Stockholm, Sweden. She was named Hilma af Klint. According to the positions of the stars and planets on the day that she was born, Hilma's life would be filled with magic and mystery. Several generations of the af Klint family were commanders in the Navy and drew nautical charts. These charts mapped what lay beneath the sea along Sweden's coasts, so that ships could stay safe. One day, Hilma would also draw maps of what couldn't be seen, but not maps of what's hidden underwater. Hers would be maps of the spirit world. Sometimes Hilma thought she could hear things that other people couldn't hear, and see things that other people couldn't see. Not exactly ghosts, but something similar. Now and then she felt like she knew what was going to happen, long before it actually did. In the summer, the af Klint family lived on the island of Adelso in Lake Marland. Hilma, her younger sister Hermina, and their sisters and brother learned math, sailing, physics, and botany. It was fun, but more than anything else, Hilma loved drawing. She drew pictures of almost all the flowers she saw. "Look at this, Hilma," said her father one day. "It's a magic square. Study it carefully and tell me what's magical about it." Hilma thought so hard that her brain almost tingled. "Goodness me," her father said as he read the newspaper. "It says here that a Scotsman named Alexander Graham Bell has invented something called a telephone. It's a device you can use to talk to someone even if you're in different parts of the world. Sounds like magic." "Papa," Hilma said, waving her hand excitedly in the air, "I figured out exactly how the magic square works."
In a magic square, the numbers in each column and each row add up to the same total. The numbers in each of the corners of the square also add up to the same total.
Magic square, eh? In the 19th and early 20th century, there were lots of discoveries that showed that the world is filled with invisible waves. In 1837, Samuel Morse and his colleagues invented the electric telegraph. They turned the alphabet into a code made up of dots and dashes. This Morse code could be used to send messages over long distances. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone. In 1879, Thomas Edison launched his version of the electric light bulb. In 1885 to 89, Heinrich Hertz proved that light and heat are made from electromagnetic waves. In 1895, Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen discovered X-rays. These let doctors see inside the human body without cutting it open. In 1905, Albert Einstein showed that the world is made up of tiny invisible particles called atoms. A few days before Hilma turned 18, something terrible happened. Her little sister Hermina, who was just 10 years old, fell ill and died. One evening, not long afterward, Hilma was sitting alone in her room drawing. It was very quiet. The only sound that could be heard was the rasping of her pen on the paper. Then something made her stop. The flame of her candle flickered. Hilma looked behind her, but saw nothing. "Hilma?" There seemed to be a soft voice coming out of thin air. Hilma's blood ran cold. "Who's there?" Hilma asked. "It's me, Hermina." Hilma's Fear melted away. To her surprise, it didn't feel strange to be talking to Hermina. Even though her sister was dead, it felt as though she was close by, perhaps standing behind a curtain. A couple of years after Hermina's death, Hilma began studying art at the Royal Swedish Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm. How wonderful it was to draw and paint all day. The studios at the school smelled of turpentine and oil paint artist smells. Light streamed in through the big windows in the room where drawing classes were held. There were only women in Hilma's class. In fact, women being able to study at the academy was quite new. Not long before, only men were allowed to go there. "Women shouldn't be allowed to paint at all," a male student said to one of the professors. Hilma and her best friend, Anna, looked at one another and shook their heads. What a silly thing to say. When Hilma finished her studies, she found a studio in the middle of Stockholm. She painted landscapes, and sometimes people asked her to paint their portrait. Her paintings of flowers were very realistic, almost like photographs. In America, the sisters, Kate and Maggie Fox, claimed that they could receive messages from the dead. They became world famous. Spiritualism, the belief that it is possible to speak to the dead, grew very popular in America and Europe in the mid-19th century. The Fox sisters received messages from the dead in the form of a series of tapping sounds, some long and some short, a little like Morse code. Years later, it was discovered that the Fox sisters had lied. The sounds didn't come from the spirit world at all, but from Kate and Maggie cracking their toe and knee joints. But spiritualism still remained popular, and it was fashionable to hold seances where groups of people would gather to try to contact the spirit world. The ability to contact the spirit world was something that followed Hilma into adulthood. She and Anna decided to explore the invisible world together. Their friends Matilda, Cornelia, and Sigrid wanted to join in too. They formed a kind of secret society called the Five. They thought the name sounded mysterious. The five lit candles on an altar and prayed together, as if they were in the church. As if they were in church. Then Sigrid lay down on the sofa and concentrated so deeply that she fell into a trance. At first nothing happened, but then it was as if she had managed to tune into the right channel. A voice filled the room. "I am Gregor." It was Sigrid speaking, but her voice sounded much deeper than usual. Hilma got goosebumps. They were talking to a spirit. While Sigrid was in a trance, she passed on messages from Gregor and several other spirits. The five took turns writing down what she said. Sometimes the messages came in the form of pictures, and then it was almost always Cornelia who took control of the pen. Hilma thought this wasn't fair. She was an artist after all. Why shouldn't she draw for the spirits too? Hilma wondered why the spirits never gave her any important messages. Didn't she know enough about the spirit world? Perhaps she could change that. "Why are you sitting there staring at that glass of water?" Anna asked one afternoon. "I'm practicing," Hilma replied. "Practicing what?" "My spiritual abilities. There's a secret in the water. If I look at it long enough, I will understand." Hilma stretched. She was stubborn and patient, but her neck was stiff and her legs ached. Staring at a glass of water for hours was boring. It also made her thirsty. What is water really? Molecules composed of the tiniest particles, atoms, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Water has existed since the beginning of time and is essential to life on Earth. Hilma looked at the glass again. Perhaps a dinosaur once drank these very molecules, or a seahorse swam around in them. Water is something eternal. She smiled to herself as though she had suddenly understood something important. Then she drank the water and went out to get some air. Sometimes the five used a spirit board to make contact with the spirits. A spirit board was a piece of cardboard with the letters of the alphabet written on it and a special wooden pointer called a planchette. Matilda lightly held the planchette and asked the spirits a question. The planchette would suddenly begin to slide over the letters. Then it stopped. After a moment it moved again and then stopped once more. The five wrote down all the letters it stopped at. The letters they collected formed words and sentences. One evening, they made contact with a spirit who called himself Amaliel. He said that one of the five would be given a special task to do, making paintings of the invisible world of the spirits. The tension in the room was high, and Hilma could hear her heart pounding in her chest. Then the pointer began to move. It felt like an eternity before it stopped at the first letter, H. This is soon followed by an I, then L, then M, and A. At last, Hilma had been given a job to do. Hilma agreed to take on the task without knowing how it would work. The idea of painting pictures that contained messages from the universe was more than she'd ever dreamed of. Happiness, hope, and fear swirled inside of her. How would she do it? To prepare herself, she decided not to paint anything at all for a few months. No portraits and no landscapes. She meditated and was careful about what she ate. No meat and absolutely no fish or seafood. She wanted to keep her mind and body clean and healthy. Primordial Chaos. Number 16, 1906-7. At last, the time came. Hilma threw herself into the unknown and got started. She felt free, now that none of her paintings had to look like the real world. Her paintbrushes could dance across the canvas however they wanted. The spirits told her which signs and symbols to paint. Triangles and circles, crosses and spirals, roses and lilies flowed onto the canvas. Letters that didn't form words. Puzzles and riddles made of colors and shapes. But what did it all mean? Even Hilma herself didn't know. The 10 Largest. Number 2. Childhood, 1907. The 10 Largest. Number 3. Youth, 1907. When Hilma finished painting for the day, she cut off contact with the invisible world. She spent the rest of her time doing ordinary, everyday things like buying eggs. It took lots of eggs to make the paint she used. Hundreds, in fact. Hilma af Klint and many other artists and authors in the early 20th century were interested in a way of thinking called theosophy. Theosophists believe that all the religions in the world come from the same spiritual tradition. They also think that there's a spark of the divine in all living beings. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in New York in 1875. By 1908, Hilma had spent more than a year painting pictures. One day she found out that the famous author and theosophist Rudolf Steiner was coming to Stockholm. She had read several of his books and wanted to show him her paintings, so she wrote to him and invited him to visit her in her studio. But when Steiner arrived, he looked around in silence and shook his head. He thought it was strange that spirits could have painted pictures through her brushes. He told her she ought to spend her time reading and studying instead. Then he yawned. Hilma couldn't hardly believe it. She had shown him paintings that contained messages from the universe to humanity. How could he be bored by that? She couldn't understand it. Goodbye, Miss of Klint. Steiner left her studio without saying another word. But, she started, then fell silent. What can you say to someone who doesn't want to listen? After Rudolf Steiner went back to Germany, Hilma stopped painting. No one understood what she was doing. At least that's how she felt. That's how it felt. Steiner often gave lectures about spiritual and mystical subjects. Lots of people wanted to see and hear him. One of the people who came to listen was Vasily Kandinsky. He was an artist just like Hilma. Mr. Steiner, said Kandinsky, I'm trying to come up with something new. Something no one has painted before. Paintings that say something about the universe. I see, said Steiner. Well, I have something to tell you, Mr. Kandinsky. Then Steiner whispered something into Kandinsky's ear. At home in Sweden, Hilma studied different religions and myths. Many of the stories she read about were about people going on adventures to unknown places. The heroes of the stories often faced obstacles, fought monsters, and explored the underworld. Then they came back home with new knowledge. She read about knights searching for the Holy Grail and about alchemists hunting for the Philosopher's Stone. All of these stories were about people looking for answers to life's big questions. The five no longer spent much time together, and they stopped holding seances, but Anna often visited Hilma. Here's something interesting, Hilma said one afternoon. Everything on Earth has an equivalent in the universe. Atoms look like little planets. The spiral shapes of galaxies are the same as the shape of tiny snail shell. Even the branches and the roots of a tree look the same. The Seven-Pointed Star, number 2, 1908. Hilma named one series of paintings the Seven-Pointed Star, even though there were no stars with 7 points in any of them. She wondered if the world would ever see her paintings. In the meantime, they gathered dust in her studio. Alchemy is an ancient science that came before modern chemistry. The aim of alchemy was to transform one material into another material that was more noble and more perfect. Many alchemists dreamed of turning other metals into gold, but they also believed that the soul could be made pure and brought closer to the divine. It was said that the famous alchemist Nicolas Flamel, who lived in Paris in the 14th century with his wife, Perronel, managed to create a philosopher's stone. According to alchemists, this stone was a legendary object that could turn metals into gold or give humans eternal life. The house where the Flamels lived in Paris is still standing today. One day, Hilma met up with Anna to have tea. Look at this, she said. Hilma held up a pine cone and counted the spirals made by the spikes. 5 in one direction, 8 in the other. She counted the spirals in the middle of a flower. 13 in one direction, 21 in the other. The plant seeds and petals grow in spiral shapes, she said. The number of spirals is almost always a number from a list called the Fibonacci sequence. Each number in the sequence is the sum of the 2 numbers before it. 1, 1, 2. 3, 5, 8. 13, 21, 34, 55. Anna looked doubtful. Try counting the spirals. In the sunflower, she said. There are lots of them. Hilma marked the sunflower seeds with paint to make them easier to count. Yellow in one direction, blue in the other. 34 and 55, you see? It's almost like magic. Then she laughed. What's so funny? Anna asked. Hilma put her teacup on the table. I was thinking about how scientists like to put everything into categories. They want to control life itself. At the same time, we humans are helplessly whirling around together on a small planet floating in space, which is infinitely huge. There's nothing we can do about it, no matter how much we count, measure, and weigh. In Germany, Vasily Kandinsky kept painting like Hilma. He tried to create pictures of the spiritual side of life. Paintings in deep blue, ruby red, and emerald green. Kandinsky had a special ability called synesthesia. This is when the senses combine together in unusual ways. It meant he could hear how colors sound and see colors in music. To him, paintings were like symphonies made of colors and shapes. The very first abstract painting in the world was created in 1911 by me. No other painter created abstract pictures at this time. Best wishes, Kandinsky. This is amazing, said admirers of art. Kandinsky has invented the first abstract art. No one had heard of the Swedish artist Hilma af Klint, even though she had made abstract paintings several years before Kandinsky did. But Hilma didn't care. She never painted to be famous. Instead, she wanted to understand the universe. After a break of nearly 4 years, Hilma felt ready to pick up her paints and brushes again to finish the task that the spirit Amaliel had given her. She no longer allowed the spirits to control her brushes, but she still painted their messages. The swan. She made a series of paintings exploring different subjects. One series was called The Swan. Some of the paintings in the series show a black swan and a white swan, but some of the others don't contain anything realistic at all. Perhaps they are images of the swan's soul. Altarpiece number 1, 1915. Altarpiece number 2, 1915. Altarpiece number 3, 1915. When Hilma finished her altarpiece series, her task was complete and she could relax. The 3 large altarpiece paintings seemed to sum up the work she was trying to do. The rainbow ladder looks like it leads up to a golden sun, while the dark one seems to go down to the underworld. After the last painting, the one with the big circle, was done, she had painted 193 pictures. All these paintings would look good inside a temple, she thought. A spiral-shaped building that looks like a seashell or a galaxy. Over the years that followed, Hilma continued to paint abstract pictures. She made paintings that depict small things and big things, atoms and religions. She made her pictures from the basic shapes that her father taught her about when she was little: circles, squares, triangles, and rectangles. Hilma also filled many notebooks with her thoughts about the invisible world. The paintings were bursting with lists and explanations of various signs and symbols. Series 5, number 4, 1920. Hilma took the train to Switzerland several times to hear Rudolf Steiner giving lectures. He had designed a building he called the Goetheanum. People came from all over to study spiritual matters there. She had an idea. What if the Goetheanum was the temple where her paintings belonged? Hilma thought that the whole world should share the messages in her pictures, and Steiner would help her. She was afraid that without his help, her artworks might be forgotten forever. Mr. Steiner, I want to donate my paintings to the Goetheanum. Will you accept them? Steiner looked at out the window. Look at that beautiful eagle flying out there, he said, and walked away. Hilma was sad and shocked. He didn't want her paintings. She thought about destroying them all. But instead, she went home and kept doing the thing she loved most: painting. The paintings she made next were different. This one's called The Birch Tree, 1922. She started painting with watercolors, sometimes on wet paper. The colors flowed around the paper and mixed together. Instead of painting realistic images of plants, she let the colors show their innermost selves, as though flowers and trees also had secrets. Untitled, 1924. Years went by. In Europe, World War II was raging. Hilma was over 80 years old now and knew that her time on Earth would soon come to an end. She had painted more than 1,000 pictures, but almost no one had seen them. Hilma's nephew, Eric of Klint, was a vice admiral in the Swedish Navy. One day his aunt asked him to come for a visit. She had something important to ask him. "Eric, I want you to take care of my paintings," she said. "No one must see them until I've been dead for 20 years." Although she was old, her posture was still straight, and her gaze was steely and determined. "But, dear aunt, why?" Eric asked. "The time isn't right yet," she said. "But what on earth do all these paintings mean?" he asked. "I don't actually know," Hilma replied. When Hilma died in 1944, Eric put all the crates filled with her works of art and notebooks in his attic. In the winter, it was freezing cold up there, and in the summer, it was blazing hot. Paintings need a constant temperature or they can be damaged. But Eric had other things to think about besides his aunt's paintings. More than 20 years passed before he went up to the attic again. It was dark there and full of cobwebs, and a musty smell tickled his nose. Before he opened the first crate, he paused, wondering what he might find. Her paintings were rolled up and packed inside like sardines. One at a time he unrolled them. Unbelievably, they had survived. What a relief! It was finally time for the world to see them. Several decades had passed since those crates in the attic were first opened. Now hundreds of thousands of people visit museums around the world to see Hilma's paintings. No one has ever seen anything like them, and everyone is amazed. With these paintings as a map, anyone who wants to can take a journey to unknown places, just like the sailors in the Klint family and the heroes from the myths and stories that Hilma loved. But if Hilma's paintings are maps, what do they show, and how should we read them? There's no easy answer to this question. The right way to read a map changes depending on the position of the person reading it. And that's something that everybody has to work out for themselves.